Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to Business Africa with me, Ronald Kato. This week, we want better. Mineral-rich countries up the tempo against mining giants as they look to get more concessions. Armed with critical minerals such as cobalt and lithium, African countries are out to rewrite mining rules. We assess the factors pushing countries to renegotiate mining agreements. Plus, with Nigeria's economy battling headwinds, the creative sector has emerged as a beacon of hope. It is projected to create nearly 3 million jobs by 2025 and to top $100 million by 2030. Also, mobile money continues its record growth in Africa, cementing itself as a mainstream financial service. Users of mobile money grew to 781 million, with up to $836 billion processed in 2022 alone. Stay with us for the details. Thank you for joining us. Mining contracts have long been plagued by accusations of unfair terms, where one party, usually investors, wins at the expense of host countries. While the World Bank advocated liberal mining codes favorable to miners in the 1990s, African countries are now pushing back, demanding more from their resources. But can countries set a new mining order without jolting investors?
Under tremendous pressure to increase public finances, African mineral-rich countries are seeking greater agency in the governance of their natural resources, increased fiscal revenues, and local content provisions, in part by renegotiating existing agreements with miners. The countries are demanding more in taxes, royalties, and profit sharing. According to the IMF, across 15 resource-intensive sub-Saharan African countries, mining exports represent over 50% of total exports on average. Mining is also the main source of foreign direct investment. But revenue from mining accounts for less than 10% of domestic revenues. Endowed with the world's largest cobalt reserves, Congo is renegotiating a $6 billion infrastructure for minerals deal signed in 2008 with Chinese miners. Through the state auditor, Kinshasa has demanded that infrastructure investment be increased to $20 billion. The country had already signaled that it was no longer business as usual for miners when it introduced a new mining code that rattled Glencore.
Between 90 and 110.
In Botswana, President Mokgweetsi Masisi has threatened to sever ties with diamond miner De Beers. Neighboring Namibia, too, has said it will be seeking a fairer deal for its diamonds from De Beers. The move points to a new development approach to mineral resources on the continent, with countries seeking a greater say over how their resources are exploited.
Marisa Lorenzo is an independent political and economic risk analyst with a focus on mining, technology, and energy. Thank you very much, madam, for your time. Why are countries rushing to renegotiate their mining agreements?
I think since COP26, which took place at the end of 2021, we've seen African governments become a lot more vocal about what they expect from the West when it comes to negotiating contracts and when it comes to mining and energy. And we've seen Nigeria and South Africa, I think, leading this kind of new, more confident voice where African governments are saying that they want to dictate their future rather than being dictated to. And the second point is that if we look at these cases individually, we can see that there are different motivating factors. If you look at the case of Botswana, we can see that there are many different factors going into its renegotiation with De Beers at the moment. And that's because diamonds from non-Russian sources are now fetching a much higher price in the market. There's also an election coming up in 2024. And the current ruling party, the BDP, is not as popular as it once was.
To what extent is the energy transition a factor? The DRC, for example, has the world's largest cobalt reserves. Are critical minerals also emboldening countries to demand more?
Yes, I do think that definitely African governments have found themselves with a lot more room to negotiate because of how essential, like you've mentioned, these critical minerals are to the energy transition, especially cobalt, nickel, and lithium. But I think in the DRC's case, there's something very, very important to highlight. That 2008 deal was kind of like an infrastructure for minerals deal. And what is essentially so terrible about that deal is that the loan that China provided for Chinese firms to build infrastructure in the DRC, which they did do and which has had a positive impact on the country. But what that loan means is that whatever this Chinese joint venture, Sicco Mines, actually mines in the country, they do not pay tax on until the DRC pays back that $5 billion loan. And I think that we can all see that the DRC is not in a position to pay off that loan anytime soon.
Marisa, mining agreements are complex to negotiate. They take time. Mm-hmm. Have African countries built the necessary capacity to obtain better, smarter deals?
Yes, that capacity, unfortunately, is not there. But I think that governments, in taking a harder line to negotiating, they're starting to say, well, we can put in that capacity. You know, somebody has to take the first step. Although, again, I would caution that in the case of Botswana, the reason why they can drive a little bit of a harder deal is because De Beers has actually invested a lot in the local capacity in Botswana, to the point that there's a lot of local skills in that sector to actually have oversight over the diamond mining sector. Now, the DRC doesn't have that in its own sector, but that doesn't mean that it should just let investors dictate the terms.
What about concerns, Marisa, that these renegotiations, obviously unpopular with the mining giants, could make Africa's minerals unattractive?
I think it will depend. I think in Botswana's case, Masisi is playing with fire a little bit because, you know, he's seeing it a little bit as, you know, okay, we're going to get more revenue from the government. I'm going to look a lot more popular. But, you know, you are putting at stake Botswana's reputation as a stable investment destination. Because if, for example, you had another mining company that had been looking to go into a similar deal with Botswana, maybe set up something like Debswana, they might now be looking at Botswana and saying, it's not as predictable as it once was, and maybe now we're a little bit wary. When it comes to the DRC, I think that for as long as you are not kicking out investors, then I think that Africa does have that space to renegotiate and review these existing terms. These minerals are essential for the energy transition. So there's a little bit more balance in Africa's favor, but one that has to be taken forward quite carefully, I think.
Marisa Lorenzo, nice to have you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
The creative industry has emerged as one of the most dynamic and resilient in Nigeria. The sector is projected to add nearly 3 million jobs by 2025, but a lack of access to financing continues to hold back entrepreneurs.
Kabir Abdul Razak is working on a circuit board that will help power his innovation, an egg incubator that uses less electricity than a regular one. But Abdul Razak has struggled to bring his innovation to scale. He says lack of access to finance is delaying efforts to commercialize.
We locally create an incubator in Nigeria, which is being powered by cooking gas with very little amount of DC power in operations. 50% of the material we use in creating this incubator are imported materials. So if you don't have finance, you cannot be able to buy in bulk. And one of the things, if you are buying in bit, you're really incurring a lot of costs.
The United Nations say the creative industry is among the most dynamic sectors in the world economy, generating $2.25 billion in revenue and 29.5 million jobs worldwide. Glory Thomas is a fashion designer and entrepreneur in Abuja.
And I would love to see my design worldwide. I want it to go beyond Nigeria. Our major challenge right now is lack of electricity, and we have to now use generator.
We want to see that the government is able to create some innovative funding mechanisms to energize, this sector.
A report by a career platform, Joberman, says that creative industry in Nigeria provides employment for over 4 million people, and it expects that to increase by another 2.7 million in the next 2 years.
Now, after crossing the $1 trillion mark in 2021, mobile money transaction values set a new record in 2022, growing by 22% year-on-year to $1.2 trillion. $836 billion of that was processed in Africa, where users also jumped to 781 million.
Long a world leader in mobile money, Sub-Saharan Africa is now home to 763 million registered accounts, almost half the global total. In 2020, COVID-19 restrictions made mobile money a convenient and safe way to shop, pay bills and send money, driving up usage. Up to $3.5 billion a day was transacted last year using mobile money. Africa's mobile money industry processed $836.5 billion in 2022 in 44.9 billion transactions. East Africa led with $491 billion, followed by West Africa and Central Africa respectively. The report argues that mobile payments not only help people with their day-to-day needs, but also have a lasting socio-economic impact. For example, partnerships between mobile money providers and pay-as-you-go solar providers have made asset financing for solar home systems, smartphones and clean cooking stoves possible for previously unbanked low-income consumers.
And that wraps up this episode of Business Africa with me, Ronald Kato. The news continues on air and online. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Business Africa.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.